Hi, welcome to the Wellbeing Designers Podcast. My name is Reka Deák and I am the host. In this podcast, I have conversations with well-being leaders across the world. They are usually working in large organizations, having the title Head of Wellbeing or similar. We also had some guests on the show who create international forums to exchange on well-being. And they all work on a systemic change towards well-being. All of them are driven by one common mission: making the world a better place through well-being. They might be the ones whose responsibility is to take care of hundreds, thousands, or 10,000s of people's well-being. They might be the ones who keep decision makers, CEOs, engaged about the topic of well-being. They might be the ones who are proving that employee well-being is a strategic enabler of sustainable performance and business success. They might be the connectors between well-being leaders across companies and countries. I call these people well-being designers. Enjoy listening to them and learning from them. Together, we can design a sustainable work life and the future of well-being. Hi, everyone. This is episode 15, which is the opening episode of season 3 of the Wellbeing Designers Podcast. I am very happy to be back after a short break between the two seasons. And today is a super special show because we have 3 people on the show at the same time. Let me introduce them one by one. So the first one is Adina Avram. She has 10 plus years of HR management experience and 5 plus years experience as an NGO leader. Being neurodivergent, a woman, and having lived in 6 different countries has helped her to understand and embrace the complexities of fitting in while being different. Currently, she serves as a head of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and talent development and Trivium packaging, a company with 7,500 employees in 60 locations around the globe. Second guest, Dallas FitzPatrick. Dallas is an experienced and amazing diversity, equity, and inclusion professional with over a decade of experience in HR and DE&I. She currently serves as a global DEI director for Teleperformance, an outsourcing company with approximately 500,000 employees in 100 markets worldwide.
Our third guest is Shlomit Gruman Navot, who is a highly adaptable, transformational, and human-centric leader with 20 years experience in diverse environments in tech, banking, consumer tech, growth, scale, and global transformation with a high degree of complexity and change. At the time of our interview, she holds the position of CHRO at OLX Group, a global classifieds e-commerce marketplace with 3,000 employees worldwide. Hi, everyone. Hi, Shlomit. Hi, Dallas. Hi, Adina. I am really happy to have all of you here. It's not easy to coordinate 3 guests on the podcast, and it's a special podcast. I had already one episode with 2 guests, but this is the first one with 3. So welcome. And before we start with more intros, I just wanted to tell the listeners how we know each other. So we were on a panel discussion together last November on the Horizon Summit organized by the HR Congress in Amsterdam. And the discussion was really nice. We had a good flow, of course, not enough time, and we had a lot of questions from the audience. So the aim of this podcast today is to go a bit more into details about those questions. So, hi, Shlomit. I already gave an intro about you, the official bio. What about behind your bio? Who are you? Who is Shlomit? How did you get into well-being in organizations?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for getting us together today to talk about this extremely important topic and very relevant. So I guess my deeper connection to the topic started around a year and a half ago when I started the study of the well-being sciences. I was fascinated to discover how much actually everything is interconnected. And indeed, it is a science by itself. And it touches things like philosophy and psychology and history and neuroscience. So there are plenty of things that you can do and pay attention to, and a lot of interventions. So this is something that I'm trying to apply on myself as a person and as a leader. And I find it extremely, extremely helpful if you really keep the principle of small changes applied every day, make a huge difference over time. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
What about you, Dallas?
Well, thank you for having us. It's really nice to be here with this group again and to see you all again. A little bit more about me outside of the bio is I've always been interested in people and what drives people and what motivates people. So when I was doing undergrad, I studied organization behavior because I wanted to know how organizations work and how the people in organizations work. Then I did a master's program in human resource management and global human resource management and looking at how people work in international environments. So for me, learning different ways that people tick and looking at different ways in which diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what I do for my job, how it ties into the well-being of people, how organizations can help improve people's well-being and making sure that we care about each other and it's not just coming in to do the job, has been something that's always been really important to me. Looking at work beyond the work, looking at work as people, as individuals, as humans. So that's always a curious point for me and things that I want to know how we can do better, what we can improve upon, and what we can learn from each other as well.
Sounds really inspiring, and that you followed, your passion from a young age. That's always really cool to hear. What about you, Adina? So besides that, you and I, we have our birthdays the same day, not in the same year though. Could you share a bit more about yourself and your connection to well-being?
Yes, indeed. It was a nice surprise to discover that we are actually born on the same day, different year. About my first step in well-being was during COVID, where as part of my DIB work, I also initiated an employee resource group focused on mental health, and the second one in neurodiversity, which I feel both of them are quite strongly connected. Also, on a personal side, I'm passionate of alternative healing. So I also have a certificate in art therapy, and I'm also a Reiki practitioner. So I'm very much also looking in alternative medicine and holistic well-being, which I'm trying to at times integrate in the corporate world as well.
So let's jump into the questions. I would like to start with the one what we already discussed a bit right there after our panel discussion during the Q&A, but it was really the most popular question, the highly voted. So what is the response that companies have for the well-being of employees versus the responsibility of the employee? And here I would like to share what I shared also there on the panel, my favorite example of, this pivotal moment when you are, for instance, watching Netflix, 10 p.m., you just finished the movie and the next one is popping up. You would love to see, the next episode. But there you have this responsibility to decide, do I go to sleep now to be at my best next day at work? Or, do I just look at the short-term joy? And here, of course, it's an individual responsibility. But in my view, companies can still, intervene here and create this self-awareness that we stop and think at least about it and then we take action. So how do you see that?
I think like anything, this is about creating an environment for people to thrive. So first, I think we have to recognize that we are living in a very different world in terms of what people are expecting in companies, and also how employers can support their people, because the pace of change is tremendous. There's been a lot of unknowns and uncertainties in the past year. Obviously, the pandemic that changed significantly the way we are looking at well-being and mental health. So I think there is like different relationships which are built today in organizations. And the topic of well-being, all-being, is not something that organizations can ignore. They have to take it actually very seriously, as there is already a lot of research about the connection between people's well-being, level of engagement, and business performance. And we know that without a business, there are no jobs, and without people, there is no business. So everything is interconnected. I think that's kind of the first point, to really recognize that. And then what I think organizations have to answer, and this is something that we, for example, take very seriously at OLX, is what environment do you create to promote the topic and to encourage people to actually take care of themselves? And there are plenty of things that organizations can do, starting from role modeling. So what the leaders are actually role modeling when it comes to well-being. And it can be simple things. For example, a practice that I do with my team on a weekly basis, we start with the gratitude exercise. So what are we grateful for? And what is our emotion today? So how do we feel and actually speak in the language of emotions? So it's a ritual. We are doing it for over a year now. And this is, it's also a reminder, it's a repetition, but then it comes a habit, and it changes the way you look at work, and creating more positive spirals. So this is one thing where leaders are actually showing the way and showing an example. Second, there are things that you can do at company level. So obviously cultural events, from a month only dedicated to mental health. We had this month in May, where we zoomed into, as part of our D&I agenda, we zoomed into mental health. We had conversations about it. People shared openly in the organization their journey, because I think it's really important to leverage on these stories. As you know, hope is like will and showing the way. So you need a willpower, and then you need a way power. So when you are hearing the stories of others, it actually helps you also as an employee, as a person, to deal better with situations. And then now we launched the CARE program, so the Better App Care program coaching, which is another excellent tool and a platform to encourage people to actually take care of their well-being. So if you're familiar with the CARE program, it looks holistically at your well-being, your all-being, everything that has to do with nutrition, with physical exercise, with relationship, with emotions, and you can also get some coaching around that. So there are plenty of things that can be done, which the company can encourage. And at the end of the day, of course, it's up to the person to take these instruments, to leverage the environment, to learn from it, and to do something about it. So it's absolutely both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you really advocate for the importance and the responsibility of the organizations nowadays. Anything else to add, Adina and Dallas?
Yeah, while Shlomit was talking, one thing that came into mind was also the fact that as part of our leadership program at Trivium, we also integrate in a session the emotions, because if we give the leaders and managers the language to talk about emotions, and also coaching skills to help their employees through more difficult times, I think that significantly can help also with feeling safe, but also creating that safe space for employees to show up authentically. In addition to this, there are, of course, also more complicated situations. So maybe at times, due to compliance or due to specific situations, you as a manager cannot directly coach or help your direct report. But in situations like this, we also give, in my previous company, access where employees could reach out to a therapist on their own and address also personal issues or challenges that might impact their well-being and their performance in the job. So this can also be a potential solution or support for the employees.
Thank you. That's great. And I love that both of you mentioned also some programs, or more like a structured approach, but then you all mentioned these small practices that you really bring into your daily work. So it's not that you have to go away, block day for that. It's just that emotional where you start the meeting with that. I also love to use that. And Shlomit, you also mentioned the gratitude check-ins. That's really cool. So let's then start with the policy notion, because of course we will talk a bit about the challenges, and we got some questions about that. But I really would like to, recognize that we are in an exceptional place nowadays. Of course, it has a reason why well-being became so important nowadays, because of how work life changed. We spent so much time at work, so we really had to find this integration and not just do well-being outside of working hours, but also within. But how do you see this in your career? How did the role of well-being change then and what is the positives do you see about the place of well-being nowadays?
From my experience, what I've seen when I started my career, the well-being was a lot focused on physical well-being, and especially in the manufacturing companies was focused on health and safety in the workplace. Then with the DIB practices and the diversity movement, it moved a bit to accessibility. Do people with different abilities have access to reach certain opportunities in the workplace? And then I feel that more and more started moving to mental health, right? Especially throughout COVID, this is something that has been more and more focus area for a lot of companies. And I'm not sure in the rest of the world, but I know Amsterdam, which is also a bit more progressive, it's also moving towards emotional well-being, but also energetic well-being. Energy healing is something that becomes more mainstream. So I feel that the transition is more going towards a holistic approach to body, mind, and energy as well.
Yeah, I love it. And if I can just continue on this thought, I think it starts from defining well-being. In the past, it was a lot about vacation days, time off, extremely important, no doubt about it, any type of recovery. So this is something that companies need to continue and encourage. And at the same time, we need to recognize that well-being is an holistic topic. And that's why I prefer the definition of all being, because everything is interconnected, like how you take care of your body, your nutrition, intellectual well-being, relational well-being. And we have a responsibility to encourage people to think about everything in balance and let them really understand through things like education or how you educate your managers or what examples leaders are showing in the organization, that, you know, if one part is not working, most likely it will impact other parts of the all-being.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning this definition, Shlomit, because this is basically when they asked me to talk about measuring well-being. I always go back, okay, let's define what is well-being. And it's so different for each of us, right? Especially then for the whole organization. And to measure this, so we really have to go back to the roots a bit to define the question. And this brings us very nicely into the next question, which is how DE&I can promote wellness at the workplace. So that was the question. And I really would like now to grab this opportunity to separate wellness and well-being. The last episode, we had Stephen McGregor, and he gave a really brilliant definition, and I am sure you also have yours, but I can quote him. So he said that wellness is what you do after work when you go to the gym, and well-being is what you can really do during your work day or basically any time for your well-being, for your health. So this is for me really important because I still hear people saying, you will do wellness. No, it's well-being. And it's education and how terms get spread around the world. At Dallas, what is then your view about the connection of D&I and well-being? Because we see that many companies that, D&I used to be this new thing in the organization, and now well-being, and that's why they are sometimes together.
They're often tied together. And I think a reason why we see the two tied together is because the whole purpose of diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplaces is to create an inclusive workplace, an environment where people feel that they can come in and be their authentic selves. That means recognizing the whole person, recognizing that you're not just your job, your well-being is really important. So you're not just coming here to do the work. We want to take into account that when we're talking about DE&I, we want to make sure we have continuous listening. We want to make sure we have policies and programs in place that are safeguards for employees. So eliminating bias or mitigating bias, making sure that we're doing things to prevent discrimination and harassment so people feel like they can be their whole selves or authentic selves at work. So this is where I think the two intersect, where you're looking at the employees and the team members, time within the organization, making sure that they're feeling that psychological safety. And DE&I really works to promote that. We want to make sure we're creating a sense of belonging within our team members. This is something that's really important at Teleperformance for us. We have something called continuous listening. We have daily pulse surveys where we ask, how are you doing? Like, it's really just, it's a simple question. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And if we see that there is something going on, maybe one location, we're consistently getting maybe answers that are, outside of the norm, we want to look into that and see what's happening here because we care. We want to make sure that we're looking into providing a workspace, providing tools and resources for people to work authentically, be themselves, and also feel that they're heard. So that's really how I think DE&I and well-being really intersect here, making sure that we're listening, making sure we're creating safe places where people can thrive, not just, come and do the job, but actually thrive and have personal development opportunities, making sure we're really looking at everyone comprehensively, holistically, not just as someone who's doing one part of a job.
Mm. And what about this tool that you use for the how are you question? Maybe can you share more about it with the
Yes.
listeners?
So basically, it's a way to do pulse surveys, and you can do pulse surveys on any topic. You can do it across a broad organization, or you can do it across, a small subsegment. And it's really just a way when you log into maybe whatever your HRIS is, you can see that question when you log into your workplace, your work environment, and just quickly answer that question. Provide that data. It's not mandatory, but a lot of people do like to provide the information. And like I said, for us, it really gives us a way to listen to our team members to see if there is, something that they want to say, something that they want to provide feedback on, something that we can do better. We want to use continuous listening, and Pulsely is a good way for us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I
Great.
love it. And I just want to continue this thought that it's also important to understand what impacts the levels of well-being of people in organizations. So there is already a lot of research on this topic, that things like decision-making, how conversations are happening at the workplace, relationship with my manager, relationship with my colleagues, they're very, very impactful of our levels of well-being, especially our emotional well-being, our relational well-being. And as we said before, everything is interconnected. So I love the continuous listening, and at the same time, to continuously also improve ways of working and really recognize that ways of working have a huge impact on our levels of well-being. So it doesn't matter how many programs you're going to have in the company. At the end of the day, if people don't understand how decisions are made, if the ways of working are exhausting, that's not going to improve levels of well-being.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And this is where we are going, and it's an evolution. As Adina also explained us at the beginning, how, well-being evolved. I truly see this evolution. And I also see that it's needed, also the programs. It's not that, we just have to throw them out, but we have to then think beyond that as well and act beyond that. You mentioned already the word psychological safety, and this was also one of our major topics during the panel. So we have a question about that as well. And maybe Adina, I would like to then answer how many companies encourage psychological safety and well-being, but speaking up or asking hard questions is still often career limiting. So how do you deal with this in your role, or maybe some other best practices?
Yeah. Well, I can build up on what Shlomit was saying, like the ways of working and also the organizational culture, and also the managers and how they lead by example can be a big influence in creating that psychological safety. So what we have done in Trivium, under the both well-being and DIB more broader umbrella, we try to create a sponsorship from executive leaders for most of our DIB activities. So, for example, our CEO is the sponsor of the Women at Trivium Employee Resource Group. The president of EAA is responsible for our well-being employee resource group. We have our chief sustainability officer. She's very outspoken about her dyslexia and how the dyslexia impacts her communication style and how she overcomes those challenges created by this neurodivergent difference. So involving the executive leadership in the conversation and creating workshops and trainings where we give employees that safe space for them to speak up, to ask uncomfortable questions. Like this, we can promote this emotional safety where employees know that by asking a question, there is no consequence, but it's also, we take it as a learning opportunity. This also for us goes hand in hand with promoting a continuous learning culture.
What about the failure culture, accepting failures. How would you differentiate that between psychological safety?
I wouldn't differentiate it. I think they go hand in hand. Creating this culture of failure, it's also, in my opinion, linked with creating a culture of learning, because we can only learn if we are allowed to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes.
Yeah. And I think one
Of course, now depends also the scale of mistakes, but in general,
like
often than
doctors
not,
on
I
this
think it might
podcast,
go hand in hand.
there you cannot say that. So yeah, if you make a mistake, it's fine because that's a different environment, but truly,
And I think one technique that is very helpful in that is retrospective. So when you have a big project or any event where it involves different teams, it's really good once it's done, let's reflect on it. So what worked well, what hasn't worked well, what we want to do better for the future. That very much helps to create this psychological safety in the team, and also to promote this notion of you never fail, you just learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, talking about that, still there are some challenges, and we talk about this, and some companies are really ahead, but even those, they face day-to-day challenges, how to really create this well-being culture. So what would you highlight based on your experience, not necessarily, in your own company or even in your own role? What is the biggest challenge to really cultivate a well-being culture?
Who do you want to ask?
Well, no one put their hands up for this question. That's something I see.
No, I'm ready to go first, if that's okay. So I think first is the acceptance of the topic overall. I think there is still a lot of misconception about well-being, mental health, and everything that is associated with that it's not okay not to be okay. And I think kind of the first message, it's okay not to be okay. And that's something that needs to be repeated. And leaders have a huge responsibility here, because this is about leading with vulnerability. It's about saying, as a leader, when you don't know, I don't know. When you made a mistake, admit that you made a mistake. Ask for help. It's all these behaviors that create safety and openness to the topic, that it's fine to learn, right? And to seek out for help. And I think that's a responsibility of the leaders. And it doesn't make you weak as a leader. I think quite the opposite. So accept that and lead by example. And I think this is something that leaders can do, and it's available for us in every interaction. Of course, we have to create clarity. We need to simplify things, going back to ways of working, decision-making. So whatever we can make clear to people, clarity is kindness. We should do it. And at the same time, lead with vulnerability. So we have to make the conversation much more accepted, and there is still way to go with that. And I think the more we are openly sharing our experiences, the more we are creating and cultivating this environment in the organization. And I think second is what we talked about before, is the understanding what is well-being and what impacts well-being. And there is still a lot of education for us to do. And again, these are interventions that you can do every day, like the gratitude exercise, how we are making the conversations, continuous listening, as we heard before, also extremely important. And pulse surveys is a great opportunity to have listening. And at the same time, what's happening in the get-togethers, in the all hands, how open we are for questions. We, for example, removed completely anonymous questions in our all hands, and we found that people are still asking difficult questions, but in a respectful way, and that's great. That's a great example of psychological safety. Ask questions and take accountability and responsibility for your question. And that's also something that is helping people with understanding that it's okay to ask anything as long as we are respectful to each other.
Yeah, and that's so true. And even, you know that this is needed. You have even data out there nowadays, so that companies who invest into the well-being of the people, so they have a higher well-being index, they perform better. And still there are people out there who think that this is a luxury, this is not what is our priority in difficult times, in transformations. So the second question was about how do you then deal with these people? What is your recommendation? Maybe Dallas can elaborate on that.
And kind of to add on to what Shlomit said here is one of the big things you have to address is the misconception about what it is. So you have to be very thoughtful in your approach to people who are giving you pushback on wellness, well-being, DE&I. It's like, why is it important or it doesn't impact me? I've actually received that feedback more than once from employees and team members and colleagues who will tell me, yeah, I just don't think this has anything to do with me. I mean, good for you and your little corner of the world and what you're doing. I just don't see how this impacts me. So one of my key things is showing people the what's in it for them, because often people don't want to get involved if they don't see what's in it for me, how does this benefit me, to recognize that well-being involves everyone to have a say in what we're doing here and talking about it from a personal level as well, not just looking at it as a big corporate concept, but think about yourself. Think about how you work best. Think about, days when you're feeling, not your best, you're not feeling psychologically healthy, you're not feeling physically healthy, even in some cases, and you're not going to do your best work then. So for me, getting people to recognize the what's in it for them is really important. And that includes a lot of patience, a lot of persistence, and a lot of education and awareness, and making sure that I'm doing a good job within the organization, that other team members are doing a good job, and making sure that you feel safe to talk about these things, to recognize it's not just something that lives in a silo in the organization, that it really impacts us all. So looking at it from the I don't see how this affects me standpoint doesn't benefit anyone. We really want to work on this together. Another thing that I found has been really important in the organization and really dealing with the people who are not understanding why it's important is having role models, having sponsorship from our leadership team to really model the behavior of what we're talking about, to really make sure that we are sending that message throughout the organization, not just from bottom up, but top down, that it's really integrated throughout the bigger organization and not just, like I said, through little points of, okay, this is a well-being corner, this is a DE&I corner, this is HR, that it all works together. It doesn't matter where you are in the organization. This is important for everyone. So if we have that modeled and we see the sponsorship, executive sponsorship throughout the organization, I think it starts to resonate more with people when they start to see that it's not just something that lives alone, but it's something that really should be integrated throughout the organization. And that has been something for me when my team members and colleagues have light bulb moments when they'll say, I really didn't see how that impacted me, and when they have those moments, how much that makes me smile when people see something and it really starts to impact them and they start to see, now I want to bring others on this journey that I've been on, and they can also role model the behavior too. So it really kind of creates a chain reaction when you can start to get more people who are maybe initially resistant to seeing why is this important, to start to recognize it and then spread it amongst our team. It really starts to grow. And that's really the intent here, is to get more people to recognize why it's important, to spread it and let it grow, and make sure that we are recognized that our well-being within the organization, within our personal lives, within all of this is really tied together. It's really all important and it all comes together. So yeah, it's really important for me to make sure we have those light bulb moments.
I like
Yeah.
the share stories, right? Like
Yeah.
the forums for people to share stories. And I would only add about convincing people about why this is important. I think we have to adjust to the audience that we are talking with. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's really about bringing data.
Yeah.
It's the data is out there. We don't need to even to pull it. It's like it's available. The data that shows the strong correlation and connection between levels of well-being and business performance.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's all what you need, right? Like, look at the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And what came to my mind as you were talking, Dallas, that this is really then it is connected to diversity, because then you realize how diverse we are, right? Well-being is all about diversity.
Yeah.
It means something else for you and for me.
Exactly.
And yeah, but you also said light bulb moment to realize that maybe it's for you not the same as for me. And even, sometimes one person is not really connected to herself or himself, and they don't know that this is not normal, how you feel or behave. I just attended a webinar yesterday by the leadership researcher Nick Petrie, and he shared some data about his research on burnout. And sometimes, it's stages, and people, if you are caught at the right stage, then you don't have to go down, experience the worst, and you can still get to the recovery or even growth curve. What was interesting that many people experienced that personal growth when they got over that. So yeah, but anyways, it's a different topic. Let's get back to our questions from the audience, because there is still a couple of them left. And my favorite part, we already mentioned it. So how do you measure well-being in your organization? I would be really curious to know, some metrics or principles that you use.
Well, in my previous company, we have implemented a survey via CHRO. So why I really liked their survey is because you can link demographic data or collect demographic data as part of the employee engagement survey. And you can basically measure feeling of inclusion or sense of belonging through their questions. And you can then see the results split it per different demographics. So you can have a better understanding if, for example, people who identify as LGBTQAI+, do they struggle more with a sense of belonging, or do they have more challenges to integrate in the organization versus the employees who do not identify being part of the community? Or we could collect data around caregivers, and then based on that, we could see do we have predominantly women who are caregivers or men who are predominantly caregivers in their organization. And again, based on that, we could collect very good data that then could help invest in targeted benefits, in targeted perks, maybe on different policies on well-being as well. So collecting data, in my opinion, is crucial. And I strongly believe that our actions should be driven by data when we develop new ways of working, new policies, new infrastructure, maybe a compensation and benefits model. Next to the survey, like the employee engagement surveys, I think there is a lot of value also adding health and well-being or DIB angled questions in the onboarding surveys and in the exit surveys, or throughout the employee life cycle, because these as well give a lot of valuable answers on how was the candidate experience? Have they felt welcomed in the organization, or have they felt discriminated at any point throughout the hiring process, which again can add significant pressure on their well-being and mental health. So I'm a big fan of collecting surveys or implementing survey and collecting data of all kinds wherever GDPR allows. So yeah, for me, these are a few of the tools. Then, of course, we also collect feedback after every activity that we are organizing. We collect feedback to see how we impacted the organization with the different actions. And well-being can also be measured through turnover rate or retention rate, right? Because if the employees don't feel like they are welcomed or they don't feel healthy and well in the organization, then the turnover rate can also be a good indication. Additionally, wherever is legally allowed, data collected on the type of sickness leave. This is a bit more tricky because of GDPR reasons. So we cannot always point out if someone is sick due to a mental health related condition or a physical condition. So then targeted approach cannot always be taken. But if we have a holistic number of people who have been absent due to illness, that as well can be a good indication.
Great, so thanks. That's a very holistic answer. Would you like to add something else, Dallas or Shlomit?
Yeah, I mean, I really love it. And I agree with everything that Adina mentioned. When I think about the ways that we are measuring, I mean, during the pandemic, we had a separate survey, which was only dedicated to well-being. So we had the engagement survey, and then we had a well-being survey that just zoomed into how people are feeling. Then we integrated it into the engagement survey. And today we have a set of questions. We don't always ask them in every pulse, but definitely kind of in the bigger surveys, set of questions which give us the inclusion index. And that also includes well-being data. And this is one data point, of course, and I think what I loved about what Adina said, that there are different data points that you can connect to actually build a story. So for example, what people are saying after months of mental health. What is the feedback? What people are saying by using the CARE program. So there is already some data that we are collecting through the CARE program, of course, anonymously, but gives us an indication of where people are. And obviously the demographics are also helping to understand if there is a specific problem that we should address or some intervention that we need to make in a specific location. And then obviously what we are gathering after all hands, get-togethers, any event where you get people together. So I think the key here is look at all the data points, whatever you have, of course, attrition, and other, build a story. So it's always data and context. So also understanding the context, where the company is at right now, what's happening, what changes, if there are external factors that are impacting people's levels of well-being or some organizational change, and then what is the right intervention? What do we need to pay attention to? At the end of the day, I think a lot of it is about increasing level of awareness to what we talked about before, personal awareness, organizational awareness. And so at all levels, you need to increase level of awareness and increase level of optimism and resilience. And that's really kind of at the end of all these initiatives, is to make sure that people are more capable to deal with change, to deal with uncertainties, to deal with unknowns, and really take care of themselves in the midst of all of it.
That's a nice one, and makes me think of a recent model that I came across through. You know that there are these traditional sayings like, okay, we are chasing or aiming for work-life balance, right? But that would mean 50% work, 50% private life, which is in almost most cases impossible. And just by striving for that balance, you add yourself additional stress and additional anxiety. And an alternative model, what I recently came across by, is instead of looking for balance, let's look for fluidity. That means that at some point you might spend a little bit more time working than with your family or friends, but then the next week you can compensate and maybe work a little bit less and spend more time with your family. So then having that fluid approach might be more beneficial for the well-being, and promoting this approach that there are some peak periods at work and there are some important periods or seasons with the family or in the private life. So it's important to acknowledge those and create that resilience and flexibility to navigate different responsibilities that we have in our life. So again, taking that holistic approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also the work-life integration. I heard that word as well. And this, yes, it's about also your energy, how you manage your energy. You don't always answer the question that Dallas company asks, like, how are you today? You are not always 100%, but that's normal. It's just that, you shouldn't be like at around zero for a long time. So how do you always bounce back your energy and also your work life? Yeah. We have limited time left, so let's jump to the next topic, which is a bit of an outlook from you. How do you see the future of well-being in general or in your organization? And what advice would you give listeners who might be just starting their well-being journey with their organization, or just leveling it up?
I think as the nature of work will continue to change, and we've seen so much change just over the past 5 years, the importance of well-being in organizations will continue to grow. We're going to see this to be something that when we're trying to attract talent and they really care about these topics. They really want to know that you see them as more than just a number, that you care about their comprehensive self, right? So for me, looking at it as the future of well-being, make sure that you're starting to think about your plan for well-being now, not something that you'll do later, not something that you'll start to gradually implement, but really start to work it into your either DE&I or standalone well-being initiatives, into HR, somewhere where it's integrated into the organization, where it's not something that you think about later or deal with it later once it becomes a problem, where you start to see a lot of burnout, a lot of stress, a lot of turnover. We were talking about data points and how you can measure it. Start thinking about it now. Start integrating ways that you can really dive into well-being within your organization at an early stage. Start having some best practices. Start researching ways that you can really implement it into your organization. So it's not an issue that you have to deal with later, but it's something that you have already planned for. You have a strategy built into your roadmap for talking about and really integrating well-being into your organization.
So like being proactive instead of reactive, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Who wants to go next? Shlomit or Adina?
I can go next. So I think the starting point is to recognize there is life and work is part of it. I mean, going back to this integration, fluidity, I mean, we are life and every person has a life. So that's the notion of well-being. I think second, what we also touched today is the understanding of what impacts well-being. And this is why I truly believe that it's not only not going away, it's becoming stronger and stronger because everything that happens every day impacts our levels of well-being. So companies really need to be very intentional about their culture. And culture is a very big word. At the end is what are the behaviors? How do we make decisions? How do we communicate? Is roles and responsibilities are clear? Do we have duplication? Are people clear about where we are going? What is our North Star? What is our vision? When we need to pivot, we pivot and we explain to people why we are pivoting, how helpful we are for people or to people to navigate all this change that is constantly happening and what you should really, really pay attention to. Where do you need to look inwards? Where do you need to look outwards, etc. So I think the purpose at the end, and organizations are in the best position to do it, is to increase level of anti-fragility of the organization and of individuals. Because at the end of the day, the potential of any organization is the potential of the people working in this organization. And anti-fragility is a Brazilian 2.0. It's not only about coming back from difficulties or adversities, but growing out of that. It's about growth. And I think that this is where we have opportunities and responsibilities at the same time.
I love that, Shlomit. And building on your advice, I would add to take an intersectional approach and involve inclusion in well-being. Because again, taking one standard approach, we already know that does not fit all. We know that different underrepresented groups are having different challenges, right? Like the stress levels that an expat might have might not be the same as a local. The health challenges that some might have in some underrepresented group are different than the others. So it's important to break those barriers and understand and build awareness on different underrepresented groups, their needs and challenges in the workplace, in order to really create that safe space for people to show up authentically, to feel safe, to raise their challenges and find solution together with the business. Another trend, which is maybe on the downside, what I see, that well-being, because it becomes also priority, is also highly commercialized, which can also at times backfire on employees because, of course, you follow all these advices, right? And that would mean that you wake up in the morning and then you meditate, then you work out, then you eat healthy, then you go to the gym again, then you walk your dog, then you have a mindfulness moment. So at some point, if you take all the advices into consideration, it can become overwhelming and a source of stress or even more stress. So I would go back to the advice of keeping it simple as well, and also acknowledge that maybe well-being is also just a state of just be. Oftentimes can create more wellness than all the actions that we take towards a state of well-being. So at times it's also okay to scale back.
I think that's a really important point, that when we talk about well-being, to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for everyone. I work for a quite large global organization. So when we're looking at data points and we see what's important to one region, one country, one group for their well-being could be completely different for another group. So we really can't look at this as this is our well-being strategy. We're going to do the same thing for everyone. You really need to look at it from a localization standpoint as well. So much like what Adina was just saying, what factors might be affecting the well-being of, certain groups, we have to look at that at a global perspective as well. So for me, it's really important when we talk about the diversity of perspectives of what well-being means, it means we have to have an open mind and a diverse approach to how we look at our well-being initiatives and programs within organizations. So I'm really happy that you brought up that point. I wanted to talk about that earlier, but I think it might have slipped my mind. But
all good. It's nice to build up on each other's ideas.
I really have to react to it because I really love this point. There is research and there is me-search. And I think, at the end of the day, when people are asking me for advice, like, what to do, I say experiment.
Yes.
Like work out the plan that works for you. Some people indeed, they love to meditate. For some people, it doesn't work, and that's okay. And some people need to write a journal, and some people need to go for a walk. That's totally okay. Whatever works for you. That's kind of the concept of you create the platform, you create the environment, you give suggestions to people, they take what it works for them. And the best way to understand what works for you is to experiment. And then to build your own plan. So I truly love it. And I also, I was thinking it's called well-being for a reason and not well-doing, right? So it's really about being in the mood as much as possible.
Absolutely. Just to add my thoughts, because it flows so much. So Dallas started with not only reaction, but prevention. And then you continue growth and how do you then do well-being, not well-doing. And Adina did also the less is sometimes more. But I experienced also recently that, as well-being is started to get on the top of the mind of people, like I got approached by someone who knew me for a long time to do a well-being and meditation session for 40 leaders. And, I have this in me. So I was also teaching yoga. I have my own well-being journey, which worked for me. But right now, what I am doing through Wellbeing Designers is I am not advocating myself for, one well-being practice, more what you say, well-being palette, how I call it sometimes, that you come as you are, you pick, what works for you, you experiment, and then you go. Because I didn't want to say no, of course, as well, and I love to do it. How I placed it, that we started it, okay, what do we want? We want to be healthy, we want to feel well. So we need self-awareness for that. And how do you create self-awareness? There are so many different ways, as you mentioned, a couple of them, like, of course, well-being or mindfulness and meditation are two of them, but journaling, walking in the nature, even going to therapy, reading, personal development. So these are all, and we can experiment now, two of these, but just be mindful. This is maybe not for you at the moment or not for everyone. So keep searching. What works for you? How do you maintain your own well-being?
So I think I mentioned already my studies. So I'm studying the topic, and that led me to a lot of exploration. So I'm listening to different podcasts in the topic. I'm reading different books. So I became more and more curious as a result of the study. So this is something that helped me a lot. And at the same time, of course, practicing. So I'm doing exactly like what I mentioned before, experimenting. And for me, what works is I love walking. So if I have a problem and I can't solve it, so I go for a walk for half an hour and things become clearer. Sometimes I write down. So it's like chewing the emotions. So write down, what are the emotions, what is actually happening, trying to reflect on that, having conversations. So there are people I will pick up the phone and just kind of, okay, can you help me to reframe the situation? So it's different things that I'm doing, different interventions. So indeed, not trying to do everything at the same time. And I'm just trying to check constantly, how am I balancing the different aspects of all being? So how much time did I spend this week with friends? How much time did I spend with family? How much quality time I spent with colleagues, with people who work for me? Did we have meaningful conversations? Did we have deep conversations? So constantly kind of trying to reflect on what I've been doing on that week and what potentially do I want to do differently next week. So it's constant checking, a lot of exploration, experimenting, and repeating, as we talked about in the beginning, the importance of rituals. So reminders, repetition, and rituals, repeating the things that are actually helpful.
Yeah. For me, it's quite similar with what Shlomit was saying. Actually, I use this online tool, which is called Wheel of Life. It's a common tool in coaching. where you can rate from 0 to 10 different aspects of your life, for example, family, education, growth, so on. There are different areas of life. And I'm doing this exercise on a monthly basis. And the areas in which I feel I'm lowest in that particular month, I'm making a conscious effort to take action. So, for example, if I see that in a certain month I worked more and I spent less time with family and friends, then I would take a conscious decision to invest more time and create experiences with family and friends. So this is one thing, like keeping that more or less balanced or fluid life, or acknowledging that balance is not possible throughout the full month. So I have to distribute my effort. I have a dog, so daily walks with my dog definitely are an energy giver. I process my emotions through painting, so that has been a very helpful way to channel my emotions. I don't show the paintings, so only to close friends, because I'm not that talented, but it's a fantastic way of releasing emotions. Another thing that has been very helpful for me is to learn to set boundaries and say no. I've read a few years ago this book, Set Boundaries and Find Peace. Completely changed my life. So learning how to set boundaries and learning about my needs have been definitely a game changer for me. And because I have been diagnosed last year in April officially of ADHD, in the second part of the year and also early this year, my focus was on learning more about my symptoms, diet, nutrition, well-being activities to help manage the ADHD symptoms without medication for now. So that's me.
For me, I find that it's really important for me to pour into myself. I spend a lot of times pouring into others and doing things for others, whether that be at work, whether that be in my home life. And I recognized that I wasn't taking that same engagement and intensity that I put into many other things into myself. And I was starting to realize I can't pour from an empty glass. So I can't give more of what I'm not giving to myself. I realized what was important for me was to take time to disconnect. So I like to take, I call them tech-free Sundays, which is hard for me because I'm addicted to my phone, but tech-free Sundays where I put my phone down, I don't really engage, I read, I go for walks. I'm really into photography, so I go on photography walks. I also paint, so just taking time to invest in things that make me happy and feeling guilt-free about it, not being like, oh, I should be doing this, I need to work on this and work on that, but really taking that time to disconnect and invest in myself so I can feel recharged, so I can feel really good about what I'm doing without feeling like something's lacking. So pouring into myself is what I call it. But I've also recently gotten into journaling. I'm someone who always likes to write. You mentioned that as well, Shlomit, that writing things down. I have 3 or 4 notebooks at my table right now that I go through, and writing things down really sometimes provides me with additional clarity. And I feel that with writing things down, I can see a bigger picture of something. And then if I even write it and type it out, when I write, it just connects to something deeper for me. So those are ways that I really find that help me with my well-being journey and making sure that I take care of my own emotional needs, my own well-being, so I can still continue to give my best to others because that's important to me as well.
If I can just add one more thing, I mean, when I was listening to Dallas, I was reflecting on one thing that has been very helpful for me is the importance of recovery and understanding that recovery can be very small. I mean, there is the big recovery, like taking a break, which is extremely important. And then there are small recoveries that we have to pay so much attention throughout the day. Like, for example, if you have back-to-back, take 15 minutes between meetings, or take this half an hour to walk outside in the nature. And of course, you know, I'm a big fan of Pilates. I'm doing Pilates, trying at least 3 times a week. I find it also to be a form of recovery. So stress overall is not bad because it drives us forward, but stress without recovery is very bad. So again, this is level of awareness.
Thanks a lot for sharing all of this. Really, really great how authentic you were on all levels on this conversation. And I would love to follow your journeys and maybe do a podcast together or even separately. You all look into new challenges nowadays. So I would really love to continue this conversation in the future. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for being with us on this show today. It was a really special episode. I hope that you had the same feeling. We are already recording the next episode. I am sure you will love it. So please, if you would like to get it in your mailbox, sign up to our newsletter. You can do that on our website, www.wellbeing.design. Some other updates from the Wellbeing Designers headquarters is that I was traveling quite a bit in the first 2 months of the year. I visited 2 countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and then I had a short trip to the US as well. I was connecting, of course, about well-being with people across the globe. I will be happy to share more, maybe in a separate bonus episode with all of you. In the meantime, I would like to ask you to give us feedback, share these episodes as much as you can with your network. Sign up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's important to see how much our message resonates with you. Ciao!